Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and right now when you look at all these bins over here on my shelf, I do just happen to have representation of all three phases of my bins. I mean, like all these things down here low are all systems that are actively composting. And as you work your way to the top shelves, you make your way into the older of my systems. And right now you've got one more bin that's still just composting over here, probably nearing the point where it's going to get one of its last feedings soon, if it hasn't already. This one already received its last feeding 28 days ago, 4 weeks ago. So right now this one's in the process that I refer to as foraging. And then once foraging is done, which is just the worms working down any scraps that remain, once it looks like you've got a batch of pretty fine castings, we move on to the final phase of trying to migrate the worms out of the material. And then I usually do that by setting up a nice section of the bin to try to get them to come on over. The bin that I want to check in on, though, is the one that's been sitting here foraging for the past 28 days. 2 weeks ago we checked in on it, see how it was doing. It seemed okay, and we let it continue. It was at that point, actually, that we decided that it was actually foraging. So when it started foraging 28 days ago, it was just another feeding. It was its 14th feeding, with the expectation that another feeding or two might fit in here, but we decided otherwise 2 weeks ago. We decided that the last feeding it had received 2 weeks prior would be its final feeding. So, after another couple weeks, I'm curious to see how this thing's coming along. I'm going to put on a glove, and then we'll take a closer look at how things are progressing in here. This circular piece of cardboard that I use as sort of a coaster to put my smartphone on and to put other things on, so I don't have to put them directly on the table. This thing was covering a pot that I was using once as a tiny container to run a small population in. And when you think about small populations, having a pot about this big, yeah, that's a pretty small little environment. But I believe that this bin at one point might have had even fewer worms than that pot bin had way back then. I went back to the first couple videos. The first one when we actually set this bin up, and then the one that came right after, which was its second feeding, I believe. And at that time, we actually went through the entire environment, looking everywhere, turning every little bit of this stuff over, trying to see how things look, but also mainly to see if we can spot any worms. And we got all excited. I remember that 15th day of the system, and it was kind of exciting because we opened up the system and there was a worm right there when we first opened up the container. And then I even noted during that video how we were kind of lucky, because during the entire course of the entire check-in, looking through the entire system, I think we were probably lucky to have seen maybe 10 worms total. Seriously. And even the week prior, I guess, when we had set the bin up, I only skimmed briefly through the initial setup video for this one. But there too, that must have been when we estimated collectively how many worms occupied this bin. We had a collective estimate of 24 worms, and then in that first check-in at day 15, I remember referencing that 24 and treating that as perhaps being overly kind in terms of maybe being an overly optimistic estimate for how many worms populate the system, because we would seriously go through the entire bin and be lucky to find 5 or 6 worms at times. And even during that check-in at day 15, when I felt like I'd only seen about 15 or so worms, I felt really optimistic that if we cared for the system, then we'd be able to help the very few worms turn into a good number of worms. So I guess I don't know, I usually don't go through my bins this way, but for some reason I was really interested in the outer edges. And the outer edges really seem very nice. There's a really good moisture level. I was even wondering if we'd be needing to apply moisture to this stuff, but definitely not. That bubble wrap that was covering things up here really seems to be doing a terrific job. The material looks really nice, but there's still a good amount of residual stuff in it all over the place that needs to be broken down still. We haven't even seen that many worms. There really should be no heavy concentration of worms in any one spot here, except maybe around that one leftover chunk of food that we found 2 weeks ago when we were in here. 2 weeks prior, when I had put it in here, it was still like a really large chunk of cabbage, like the center stem of a piece of head of cabbage. And that was kind of the last major chunk of food remaining in this system, and we placed it right smack in the middle so that we'd know where to look for it when we came back in here. So we're going to get to it eventually, I think, and that's probably where we're going to see the most worms, if there's any leftovers of it. I wonder if there will be. For some reason I thought there might still be something, but if we find nothing, that shouldn't be too much of a surprise either. We're definitely in that space now where it would have been, and we're definitely seeing a larger number of worms now. So now here I got something that, who knows, maybe this is it, right? Really stringy stuff. I could see this being the stem of or you know, the base stalk of a head of cabbage. If they were to strip away all the really fleshy parts of it, and if only the more fibrous inner part of it remained. That's what I'm thinking I'm seeing here. What else could it be? I don't remember what else could have been put in there next to that stalk of cabbage head, or whatever that's called. And that definitely looks like it could be what's left of it. And if I'm right, that certainly does not leave the system with much as far as large, identifiable food items. I mean, who knows? We might still bump into, I don't know, do you think we'll still find a banana stem? Yep. Just as I was about to say it, I saw one. And this one's in really great shape. I really didn't think I'd find one that's in such good condition. Although it's really flimsy, that's for sure. Maybe it just looks good. Maybe it's been nibbled away on the inside. It's still got a pretty intact interior. It's pretty interesting. Man, look at that. Is that all the leftovers that remain in this system? I definitely think there's way more moisture in here than is needed. So I'm kind of trying to bring up the more damp stuff that I observed on the bottom, try to get it up higher, perhaps give it a little chance to air out. Now I think we're starting to see where all the worms are. They're all down low where the material is the most moist. Here's one more pretty large distinguishable leftover food item, and I remember always bumping into this thing too. And it does look like it might just be the thing in the end that sticks around the longest. It makes sense because it's the most woody and toughest, I think. Here's another fairly intact banana peel, but this one must be the one where a whole bunch of the bananas are together on a bunch, where the bunch connects up and you got that really larger hunk of wood type material. Now I'm starting to think that that's probably going to be what takes the longest. But man, that's even not a whole lot as far as leftovers go. But now we're starting to bump into spots where you could see large amounts of worms all over the place, right? You would never even guess that, 173 days ago you were starting out with just a couple dozen worms, not even. And then even in subsequent check-ins that came after that you would at times feel like your very few numbers were even dwindling further. It is a little bit surprising to see where it can get to, given a little bit of time and a little bit of tender care. Although, this bin didn't receive any special tender care out of the ordinary than any other bin. It got food, it got bedding, it's been given the time that it needs. Lots of nice castings, very damp, and I keep feeling this urge to want to just leave all the covers off and let the stuff start drying out. But it feels to me like if I do that, if I follow that impulse, I'm going to kind of stunt the nice progress that we've got going on in here, I'd really like for the worms to just keep nibbling away at all this stuff until it's all beautiful castings, because even though it looks pretty good, the stuff definitely has lots of lingering bits of leftover scattered throughout it. Stuff like this I wouldn't expect much of, like an actual stick, piece of wood. But everything else that we stacked up over here seems like it should go. And it's starting to become slim pickings down in here too. So if we put all those few scraps that we did find together into one spot, we might find a little bit of a worm party there next time. So I see no harm in setting the stage for something like that. Maybe we'll just go right to the middle of the bin again and place the few scraps that we found right in here in the middle. I'm sure I missed a few too. There's probably other banana stems and stuff like that down out here in other sections of the bin. But man, this system is so nice. I really thought I'd be adding water. I didn't think that that piece of bubble wrap upside down, with all those gaps of, between the bubbles that could allow for air to flow in, I thought that there'd be somewhat drier conditions down in here. But maybe not. I guess that bubble wrap does a really good job keeping the moisture down within the system. So many nice, healthy looking worms. Yeah, I think we let these guys go a little while longer. We're going to have some really nice stuff. But at some point we might just also decide that we would want to get them working on a fresh batch of material, start, moving them out of here. Could leave some behind. We'll also have that next generation if we just maybe even move out a first wave of adult worms that are already in here, let them, start off into a new system. All these cocoons that they leave behind, like what you see here on the tip of my finger, they're all over the place. I keep seeing them. They'll remain, and the bin would actually probably get fully repopulated if we were to pull out every adult worm from this system now and just let it sit. So, who knows, maybe it is time to let the foraging end here and maybe start convincing them to head into one particular section of the bin. I'm in no hurry to, trigger that transition to that phase, so as far as I'm concerned, we're still foraging. But maybe at some point soon we can transition over to migration, start setting the stage for a relocation of some of the worms in here, and then maybe even see sort of another wave of babies coming out of those cocoons if we were to do like a nursery out of this system afterwards. So I don't know, we'll see, we'll have to decide. I think that at some point after initiating a migration of the worms out of the material, you'd be left with very few mating pairs possible, really allowing what's left in there as just sort of a nursery situation to let them hatch and also catch up with the rest of the crowd. It's sort of what I've done in the recent past and some of my other systems, maybe not waiting quite as long as I would have in the past for the material to become really, really fine and finished. Maybe even start the migration of the worms out of the stuff even when there's still a good amount of work to be done on the remaining stuff in here. I don't know, whatever, I'll play it by ear, but for now I think we're in good shape. Foraging continues after 4 weeks, and I don't know, maybe we'll let it go for another couple weeks before we check in. Maybe we'll get bored and check in sooner. I don't know. We'll have to see. All right, everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.